Chapter 9. Nitro, Joan Myers, looked incredible sitting there on a high stool at the island in the kitchen, full of stainless steel appliances he rarely used. Her long blonde hair pulled back, tight jeans, red and black flannel shirt with buttons left open to reveal the cleavage she often used to distract or entice people into doing what she wanted. But that had never worked on Bryce. She was part of an organization that had forced him into something, and he resented her for it, although he did his best to hide the animosity. She was the one trophy he wasn't interested in. She had a great personality, though, and Bryce got a kick out of the occasional sexual banter and jokes between Madigan and her. Let them joke, while I bide my time. She was there to debrief on the hit in Sochi and prepare for their next meeting with their new boss from Langley. They'd talk over dinner, over delivery pizza that was running late. She was only the messenger, she'd insisted, as she performed her role, not the person blackmailing Bryce into a corner. What she and the CIA never considered of Bryce, though, was that cornered predators were the most dangerous. The Russian had children, Bryce said, tired of waiting and deciding to vent his frustration. I told you before, I'll do what you ask me to do, as long as there are no kids involved. That was our mistake, Bryce, and I'm very sorry for it. Our intel was wrong. This time, she told him. He stared at her and shook his head while she tried to explain. But you have to realize, he was a dead man walking. His children were going to be without a father whether you took him out or someone else did. Think of it this way if it makes you feel any better. If someone else had done the deed, the hitter might have just blown the bastard's house up with the kids in it. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Really? He fumed. My father wasn't around much, but that doesn't mean I'd have been much better off without him at all. Damn it! I said nobody with kids. The bell at the gate rang, providing a needed break in the escalating tension in the room. After he tipped the delivery girl and sent her on her way, he served up the food, and neither of them spoke again. He grabbed the remote and scrolled through the movies until he found what he was looking for. 3 Days of the Condor, the film starring Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway, about a CIA codebreaker who walks into his workplace and finds all of his co-workers have been murdered. He looked to her for approval, her mouth full of pizza. She shrugged her shoulders, her eyes saying, "Why not?" They watched the film for 2 hours without saying a word. Once it had ended, she asked if she could stay the night, try to mend what she had broken. The house is so quiet, you must be lonely here, all by yourself, she called out, as he went to use the bathroom. When he re-entered the kitchen, he had her coat in his hand, helped her on with it, and then walked her to her car. There were 5 bedrooms in his beautiful home, but she wasn't invited to stay, ever. Bryce walked back to the massive silver F1 championship trophy and stared at it. He'd done just about everything he wanted to in motorsport except become regarded as the best from America. In order to do that, to surpass his hero Andretti, he'd have to win a second F1 title. It can be done, he told himself. Werner was up for it. He had funded Bryce's career and reaped dividends that kept his board of directors and shareholders very happy. That said, with only a handful of F1 races left on the schedule, Bryce needed to concoct a plan to get what he wanted. Not just more race wins and another title, but his freedom. He wanted to rid himself of the CIA. He had grown tired of the leverage they had over him. Instead of enjoying a rare night in his king bed, he spent it staring through the skylights at the blanket of stars above, and developed an action plan that just might work. Then he began to consider his contract with Werner that expired at the end of the year. He would never have gotten to where he was today without Max, but it had been a mutually beneficial relationship. He hoped his friend would remember that. The Baja Peninsula is a narrow strip of land that juts into the Pacific Ocean along its west coast and the Gulf of California along its eastern side. San Diego sits just across its northern border with the United States, and it runs south to Cabo San Lucas, the party town known for tequila, deep-sea fishing, and money. With another week to go before Bryce's next race, the Mexico GP in Mexico City, he invited Nitro, her new boss Glenn Gunn, and Jack Madigan to go off-roading on the peninsula. Every year, racers and fans that love off-road racing, the sport of racing against the terrain rather than on a racetrack or a paved course, flock to the region for spectacles like the Baja 1000. This is where racing vehicles resembling cars and pickup trucks, as well as motorcycles, ATVs, and dune buggies, race across the hills, valleys, deserts, and mountains between Ensenada on the Pacific Ocean and La Paz, far south and on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico. It's a brutal race that runs at high speeds day and night. Considering the obstacles and deep drop-offs the competitors face, it can also be a deadly one. Many companies have made a business out of providing off-road racing vehicles, complete with protective roll cages, fuel cells to protect the gas tanks from leaking or exploding in the event of a crash, helmets, fire suits, driving gloves, two-way communications, guides and support personnel, so that enthusiasts can drive the hills, the beaches, desert-like stretches, and avoid obstacles like cows in the road or 20-foot cacti. At points along the course, it can be very dangerous. If not taken seriously, the sudden drop-offs on the cliff sides and the deep ravines can gobble up a vehicle and its occupants, leaving them paralyzed or worse when they come to rest 1,000 feet below. Bryce had arranged a 2-day ride for the 4 of them, and he couldn't wait to get going. Madigan and Gunn had flown to San Diego on commercial flights from Charlotte and Washington respectively the day before, while Bryce and Nitro flew in early Tuesday morning on a private charter from Park City. The 2 men had stayed up late the night before in the hotel bar, watching Monday Night Football's West Coast game go into overtime. They'd sat just a few bar stools apart from one another. Groggy from their late night, Bryce took pity on the men and arranged for the off-road excursion to start a day later, on Wednesday, and arranged for an ice-breaking lunch instead. The Hotel Coronado was a landmark in the area, having hosted presidents and movie stars over decades for fundraisers, weddings, and parties of all sorts. The Coronado was also a popular spot for the friends and families of the Navy's finest, who were quite often seen in the area undergoing BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training at the Navy amphibious base there. Bryce had been at this hotel many times before, and always made the effort to thank the men and women of the Navy for their service and sacrifice, while they were just as enthused to meet him and pose for pictures. When Park City was mentioned, the conversation would always turn to, "Oh, you must know," or, "Yeah, that guy from SEAL Team 6 lives there now." Over lunch at a table set in a quiet corner and away from the crowd, the 4 talked about Baja, racing, travel, dogs, and football. Bryce and Madigan had both shown a fake interest in their new boss's career and family, hoping to develop a rapport that was better than they'd had with his predecessor. "Guy looks more like a nerdy desk jockey than a spy, glasses and all," Bryce had thought at first sight. "No wife, no kids, no dog, just work and Redskins football," Gunn told them. Bryce teased him about a man named Gunn working in law enforcement, but as the man had heard that 1,000 times before, Bryce could see that it irritated him, so he backed off. "What's the fastest you've ever driven?" Madigan asked Gunn out of curiosity. "With Beltway traffic, about 30 miles per hour," he replied. "But I used to race late models on dirt at Potomac Speedway in my younger days, so I know a bit about speed." Bryce leaned over and gave him a high five, pleased and surprised to learn this. He then looked to Madigan, who was nodding his approval. When the conversation headed toward business, Gunn brought up a newspaper article he'd read in the Washington Post about corruption in Mexico's federal government. Bryce opted out. "Come on, we'll have plenty of time to talk about what's next," he told them. "Let's save that for the dinner table tonight. For now, let's go have some fun." After lunch, they all loaded into a black luxury minivan and departed for Ensenada, Mexico, just a short ride south of San Diego, and the starting point for their Baja adventure. The welcome dinner Tuesday night in Ensenada had not gone as Bryce had hoped. When he had learned that Gunn had raced, although years ago, he thought that he could make for a better working relationship and perhaps even a friendship he could leverage to win his freedom. When Gunn leaned in alongside Bryce after dinner at the bar and told him he knew what he was up to, all bets were off. "Bryce, I'm with the damn CIA," Gunn had told him in a slightly inebriated state. We read people better than anyone. Don't let the clothing or the glasses fool you. I may look like a suit from D.C., but I'm highly trained, highly skilled, and capable of things you can't even imagine. So you will continue to do what we need when we need you to. Period. Bryce smiled at the man. 10-4 was Bryce's only response. The next morning, after a quick meal of breakfast tortillas and large quantities of coffee and orange juice, the four of them hopped into a white minivan that had been sent over by Baja Driving Adventures. Of the four, only Madigan was a so-called morning person. After he repeated a few things he'd heard on the Howard Stern show earlier that morning on Sirius, the rest of them livened up. Bryce could see from Nitro's expression that Gunn had shared his words from the night before, but when he smiled and winked at her, he could see her relax. After the short ride, most of it down dusty roads, they arrived at BDA, and after suiting up and a 30-minute orientation and instruction meeting with the guides, the four participants walked out into the bright Mexican sunshine. It was time to choose a partner, buckle up, and get going. "Joan, you ride with me," Gunn stated. "We can talk business along the way." Bryce looked to her, and then at Madigan, and agreed. He smiled. It took a few minutes for the crew from BDA to make sure that everyone was buckled in and ready to go. Gloves, neck braces, check. They attached the breathing tubes to the side of the full-faced helmets, allowing for filtered air to be pumped into them. The dust and silt of the desert would make life miserable without it. Helmet communications were connected and tested. Window nets meant to keep arms inside the cockpit and foreign objects out were latched into place. And then the two drivers fired up the Subaru engines and pulled out onto the road that would lead them into the wild. Bryce had driven this route many times, so it was agreed upon that he would lead the way out of town and onto the course. To Bryce's surprise, Gunn bumped his vehicle hard from behind, as if to remind Bryce he was back there and wanted to get moving. Bryce switched his radio setting from A to B so he could speak to his navigator, who was riding shotgun. "You know, I'd forgotten she had a real name," he said. "Me too. I thought for a second, who the hell is Joan?" Madigan responded. "This is gonna be fun," Bryce said with a laugh. "Let her eat," was Madigan's reply. The moment the two vehicles cleared the city's limits, away from the children and dogs playing in the streets, Bryce hit the gas and let Gunn and Nitro in his very dusty wake. Over the next 2 hours, both teams ran hard and fast through the open desert. Eventually, they began to encounter saguaro cactus, at least 20 feet high and growing for nearly 100 years. In the daylight, it might be easy to avoid running into one of them, unless you were trying to pass, or following a vehicle in front of you too closely and the dirt and dust kicked up obstructs your vision. "We better back off a bit," Gunn told Nitro over their in-car radio. "If hitting one at speed wouldn't hurt enough, their barbs would make a porcupine jealous." "Yes, please," Nitro responded, her tone of voice showing concern. "Anyway, I can't read this damn map with all the dirt flying around. Bryce said we'd encounter some cliff sides before lunch, and I'm not up to breaking my neck in Mexico." The guides had shown the CIA staffers how the maps and GPS system worked on the course. Dash-mounted satellite tracking systems were critically important in off-roading, especially when racing in the dust or in the dark. The map would show the hazards and the places where left or right turns needed to be made to stay safe and on course, and the distances between them. There was an occasional straightaway that would give the navigator a chance to take their eyes off the map and enjoy the scenery for a short time, but as quickly as it had come, break time was over, and they were back on the edge. Drivers and navigators couldn't make mistakes, for if they did, it could be a fatal one. A few times Gunn had been able to leave the path the leader had taken and get alongside Bryce, intending to pass as he flipped his rival the middle finger. But sudden evasive movers to avoid a rock or a looming cactus always sent Gunn and his shotgun rider back into second place. Bryce had driven all sorts of race cars in all sorts of conditions all around the world, and his reflexes and judgment were second to none. For a novice to desert racing like Gunn, things could happen fast. The two-seaters they were racing would typically top out at 80 miles per hour, but the guides and Madigan had cautioned Gunn and Nitro that at that speed, they'd be traveling at over 100 feet per second, the length of an American football field in 3 seconds. On dirt and gravel that gives way, and with the challenges of steering and braking, crashing a vehicle and screwing up your day or body wasn't worth it. So, they had cautioned, don't do anything stupid. "Hey, Gun, you tired of eating my dust yet?" Bryce crowed, after switching his radio back to A so the two cars could talk. "Copy that," Gun stated. "How long before a pee break?" Nitro asked. "I know that coffee's been sloshing around way too long, at least for me, and then it's my turn to drive." "Not long, maybe another 20 minutes, Madigan answered. "We have to make it around one more set of cliff sides, and then the guides will be waiting for us with food and toilet paper for anyone who needs it." Running out in front in cleaner air was preferred, but to Bryce there wasn't much of a challenge to it, and gestured to Madigan that he was getting bored. He let off the gas slightly and pushed the radio button mounted on the steering wheel. "Hey, Gun, you a betting man?" Bryce asked over the radio. "Abso-fucking-lutely," he replied. "Okay, I'm going to pull over and stop and let you pass. We'll wait 5 minutes, and then if I catch and pass you before we get to the pit stop, you'll have to burn my file and turn me loose." Madigan slapped Bryce's right shoulder, then shot his hands up in the air as if to say, "When did you come up with that one?" Bryce attempted to shrug his shoulders, but the 4-inch wide shoulder harnesses wouldn't allow it. He waited for a response from Gun, and then radio checked to make sure he was still there. "Winters to Gun. You copy?" "Negative on the fire. Nice try, but I accept the challenge. We'll be waiting for you at the checkpoint." Bryce shook his head in frustration, but pulled off the course onto a low hillside and waited. Madigan switched the in-car radio back to B so they could talk, but Bryce just shook his head, slowly this time, and turned the radio back to A. 2 minutes later, Gun and Nitro blew past Bryce and Madigan's vehicle, leaving them in the dust for a change. Finally, Gun had clear skies and air in front of him, with his foot hard on the gas pedal. The clock was ticking. Gun watched as Nitro switched the radio back to B, and told him that within a mile they would have a sharp 90-degree right turn, and then a slow ride along a very narrow and high cliff path, before it opened to where Madigan said the crew would be waiting. "Tell me when we're a quarter mile out and I'll slow it down," he told her. As they rode closer and closer to the spot where they'd need to turn, the gray mountain in front of them rose higher and higher into the sky. Closer now, Gun could see rocks of all shapes and sizes strewn across its face. "Half mile," Nitro said. "Remember, there's a cliff coming." Gun didn't respond. He kept his foot hard on the gas and kept going. "Quarter mile," Nitro told him, this time her voice sounding a bit more concerned. "1/8 mile. Please slow down," she begged. "What did you say?" he joked, shouting over the whine of the engine. He knew the cliffside was coming fast. At this speed, they'd be on it within seconds. But the urge to compete, to win, had overtaken him. He let off the gas, touched the brake, downshifted from 3rd to 4th gear, and got on the brake again as he turned to take a quick look at his navigator. He saw her white helmet falling forward with the deceleration, and noticed she had let go of the clipboard holding the map. He pushed harder on the brake and shifted down into 2nd gear as he looked back to the road. It seemed to end right in front of him. Suddenly his hands fell from their grasp of the wheel. At 40 miles an hour the vehicle continued on, straight off the side of the cliff. Years before, on a New Year's Eve, Nitro Circus Star driver Travis Pastrana had traveled 269 feet over water in a Red Bull rally car, through the air in Long Beach, California, from a pier to a barge. But the scene unfolding 250 miles to the south on the Baja Peninsula was a polar opposite. The vehicle crashed onto a mound of jagged rocks and boulders that had fallen down the mountainside over the decades and collected far below. Something must have punctured the fuel cell, as fire immediately engulfed the vehicle. A swirling wind carried the smoke away and through the ravine. Nearly 8 minutes later, Bryce slowed to a stop and pulled up to the edge of the cliff. Madigan tapped Bryce's shoulder again, gesturing with both hands as if to say, "What gives?" Bryce flipped the ignition switch to kill the engine, lowered the window net, and then removed his gloves, unbuckled the shoulder harnesses, lap and crotch belts, unplugged the wires to his helmet headset, removed the neck collar, and unstrapped his helmet, placing it on the dashboard. Bryce climbed out and walked a few feet to the edge of the cliff and looked down, gesturing for Madigan to join him. After his navigator had repeated the same steps Bryce had taken, he climbed out and walked toward the side of the cliff. A spot of bright light washed across Bryce's dust-covered driving suit and then Madigan's, causing him to stop dead in his tracks. Bryce looked across the canyon and up the mountainside at the source of the blinding light, and gave a thumbs up to the sniper who had decided the race. "Well, that'll help get the CIA off our backs, maybe for good," he said without taking his eyes off the floor of the canyon. Bryce pointed down to the mess that used to be 2 agents of the CIA and an off-road vehicle. "What did you do?" Madigan asked, as he turned his eyes from the sniper's location on the hillside to the site far below them. "What did you do?" Having learned his new handler left no loved ones behind, Bryce felt no remorse for what had just happened. He then turned his thoughts to the beautiful Nitro, who had played the good cop to many CIA bad cops since their arrangement had been made. She may have appeared sympathetic to his plight now and then, but she also pulled hard on the leash one too many times. Her ambivalence about hits that left children without a father sealed her fate. He would shed no tears for her either. "What's that saying?" he asked as he turned toward Madigan. "Which one?" he said dejectedly, still shaking his head as he stared at the accident scene below them. "Live by the sword, die by it too?" With that, Bryce began to reverse what they had just done and prepared to move on to the checkpoint. Madigan stood quietly at the hillside until Bryce called out to him. "We need to get moving now, bud. You good?" he called out. Madigan turned toward his friend, nodded, and walked back to rejoin the driver. Once the engine was restarted, the two sped off, Bryce driving as if they were on a qualifying lap, flying around the cliffside and headed for the refreshments and food that would be waiting for them. Bryce switched the radio to B and laid out the rest of the plan. They'd wait patiently for 5 minutes, then 10, and eventually feign concern for their friends when they didn't arrive at the rest stop that was clearly marked on the map. "Why didn't you tell me what you had planned?" Madigan asked Bryce over the radio. When he didn't answer, Madigan asked again. "It was a game day decision," Bryce began. "I gave the guy an out. When he didn't take it, I fed him to the dogs. I didn't want to, but I needed a plan and he fell into it." "No, they fell into it, Bryce. They did." The two didn't speak another word until they arrived at the checkpoint, hydrated some plants and then themselves, before washing the dirt and fine silt from their faces. They sat down to eat the tortilla and enchilada lunch that had been staged there for them, but Madigan had pushed his plate away. Once Bryce finished his meal, the acting began, and the concern for the two drivers late to the lunch was heightened. A satellite phone, the only thing that could reach civilization way out in the middle of nowhere, was used to call the tours office in Ensenada. A quick check of the locator for the GPS device in Gunn's vehicle told the teams exactly where the car had come to a stop. "They're in a ravine," the contact in Ensenada informed them. "I'll call for a rescue chopper right away." When the rescue party discovered the crashed vehicle, it initially seemed as if yet another set of adventure seekers had somehow messed up. Their charred bodies were removed from the wreckage. Only then did it become clear from the condition of their helmets that something else had happened. There should only have been one opening, in the front for vision, but both helmets had new, larger openings in the back. In the following week, the news media around the world would describe the failed murder attempt on the famous race car driver and one of his engineers. The target the CIA had wanted Bryce to kill in Mexico City would never know just how lucky they were. The FBI and Mexican authorities reviewed the crime scene photo that showed the remains of the occupants, still strapped in their seats. The face shields of the victims' helmets had melted in the ensuing fire and erased any trace of a bullet's entry But the significant holes in the back of both helmets told investigators what had happened long before autopsies back in the States verified it. In a secret arrangement made by the American State Department with their counterpart in Mexico, the true identities of the individuals found in the wreckage wouldn't be disclosed. What would the CIA have been doing off-roading with this F1 driver and his mechanic? And who would have them killed? The Mexican government relied heavily on tourism and wanted no part in anything that might threaten even one of those much-needed dollars and euros. In the coming days, Gunn's boss at Langley would want answers, while Bryce went about his business racing, waiting for the next handler to arrive. When they did, his story would be simple. "Look at what you bastards have gotten me into," he'd tell them when the call came. Only one of the two bullets, or what was left of it, was recovered, after it was found embedded in the fuel cell of the vehicle. FBI's ballistic experts identified it as the 7.62 type used by the Russian military, particularly snipers. "You had me knock off a Russian oligarch. Now they're trying to kill me. The shooter obviously thought I was driving the lead vehicle. So what are you going to do to protect me now?"